People don't have ideas, ideas have people. For a long time, the notion of spirit possession was deemed a real-life danger for human beings. Only in the last few hundred years have we relegated such ideas to the fictional world of fairy tales and stories. Today, we know better. We have been thoroughly sobered by modern science and now assume the superiority of rational thinking. Ironically, it is precisely this belief that drives us all the more deeper into such a spirit possession we deemed as long since overcome thanks to our modern intellect. This is what Fyodor Dostoevsky tellingly illustrates in his novel Crime and Punishment. Today, we look at the psychology of possession. By studying the horrifying transformations of the protagonist, we will understand how such a possession can look like in real life and what we can do to defend ourselves. Maybe we will need this knowledge sooner than we would care for. The protagonist of our story is called Raskolnikov. He is an impoverished student, but very smart and educated. He lives in a society which is broadly predicated on Christian beliefs. Hence, it is forbidden to steal and kill. Every human being is believed to possess a spark of divinity, independent of past or future actions. In this sense, all men are created equal, and life is considered a holy force to be protected at all costs. However, there's also severe poverty in Russian society. All around Raskolnikov, people are suffering dreadfully. This makes fertile ground for radical movements. Soon, revolutionists question the fundament of this Christian value system. And so does the young Raskolnikov. A new ideology is beginning to brew in the circles of the intellectual elite. One way of thinking about ideology is in terms of a spirit. This spirit has a certain intention, and once it has possessed someone, he falls prey to its power. From now on, the mind is in control of whatever the ideology aims at. When we think in these terms about spirit possession, this is not only some superstitious conception from the Middle Ages. It is a quite common occurrence in our time as well. Interestingly, the comparison of ideology and spirits also occurs on a prominent point in a famous book. It happens to be the Communist Manifesto, whose first sentence starts with the following: "A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism." So back to Raskolnikov, whose possession has just begun. Although feeling great empathy towards humanity, some of these radical notions seep into his mind. He starts to question the claim that all men are created equal. Enthusiastic about the ideas of the revolutionists, he states that, "I only believe in my leading idea, that men are in general divided by a law of nature into two categories. Inferior, meaning ordinary, that is, so to say, material that serves only to reproduce its kind, and men who have the gift or the talent to utter a new word. The first category, generally speaking, are men conservative in temperament and law-abiding. They live under control and love to be controlled. To my thinking, it is their duty to be controlled, because that's their vocation and there's nothing humiliating in it for them. This category contains 90% of people. Everyone who participates in ordinary life and contributes in conventional ways to society falls into the first category. The second category, all transgress the law. They are destroyers or disposed to destruction according to their capacities. They seek in very varied ways the destruction of the present for the sake of the better. But if such a one is forced for the sake of his idea to step over a corpse or wade through blood, he can, I maintain, find within himself, in his conscience, a sanction for wading through blood. As an example for this radical pronouncement, he argues that if the discoveries of Kepler and Newton could not have been made known except by sacrificing the lives of 1, a dozen, 100 or more men, Newton would have had the right, would indeed have been duty-bound, to eliminate the dozen or 100 men for the sake of making his discoveries known to the whole of humanity. So there is an elite of extraordinary people who have the capacity to fuel the development of humanity. Naturally, this elite are the revolutionists, which came up with this idea in the first place. This means that they have the right to violate profound principles of human society, if they consider this a necessity for the greater good. Since the vast majority of people are ordinary men, they won't allow their extraordinary fellows to exercise this right of transgression. The masses will scarcely ever admit this right. They punish them or hang them, and in doing so fulfill quite justly their conservative vocation. But the same masses set these criminals on a pedestal in the next generation and worship them. The first category is always the man of the present, the second, the man of the future. The first preserve the world and people it. The second, move the world and lead it to its goal. Each class has an equal right to exist. Of course, Raskolnikov, too, deems himself belonging to the class of extraordinary people. So if the opportunity comes for him to violate conventional moral in the service of the greater good, he won't hesitate. Soon the plot offers such an opportunity to him. He takes his chance and puts his new beliefs into practice. What follows is chaos and terror. He hears of an unscrupulous pawnbroker who stores money and valuable objects in her flat. Raskolnikov thinks that the money could liberate him from poverty, and then he could go on to perform great deeds in the service of humanity. Or, as the great Dostoevsky scholar Joseph Frank writes, it is the fate of suffering humanity that concerns him. Why not kill a wretched, rapacious and useless old moneylender and employ the funds to alleviate the human misery so omnipresent in Raskolnikov's world? So he plans to kill the old woman, and thereby violating the Christian principle of the sanctity of human life. After the murder is committed, Raskolnikov's world is thrown into chaos. The problem is not that he gets caught, much worse. He gets away with his deed. But what follows is not the result that he had expected. According to his theory, he now should be at peace with the world and himself. As an extraordinary man, he removed an obstacle to the greater good, but instead he finds himself racked with confusion, paranoia and disgust. His theory loses all its power as he struggles with feelings of guilt and horror and is confronted with the internal and external consequences of his action. Yet, he cannot find a flaw in his new rational belief system. What went wrong? Raskolnikov formulated a noble goal and devised a rational plan guided by reason to achieve this goal. But the discrepancy between the abstract idea and concrete human reality is now backfiring with immense force. It is precisely this arrogance of the intellect that collides with the irrationality of lived human experience. Or, as Frank puts it, the aim of these ideas was altruistic and humanitarian, inspired by pity and compassion for human suffering. But these aims were to be achieved by suppressing entirely the spontaneous outflow of such feelings, relying on reason, to master all the contradictory and irrational potentialities of the human personality. Raskolnikov was created by Dostoevsky to exemplify all the potentially dangerous hazards contained in such an ideal. The moral psychological traits of his character incorporate this antinomy between instinctive kindness, sympathy and pity on the one hand, and on the other a proud and idealistic egoism that has become perverted into a contemptuous disdain for the submissive herd. Back in Dostoevsky's time, this problem took place on the grand scale of society. This radical philosophy was peddled by the intellectual elite called intelligentsia. Raskolnikov is a character who incarnates one of the ideologies of the radical intelligentsia and who dramatizes its dilemmas. Ideology is revealed as self-destructive when applied and tested in the actual circumstances of a human situation. Raskolnikov is acting on a pathological psychic predisposition to kill, conditioned by ideological self-intoxication. This is what happens when substantial and profound belief systems are exchanged for ideological possession. This type of possession bears a frightening resemblance to demonic possessions we know from stories and legends. Like a demonic spirit, ideology seeps into your mind and introduces schisms and contradictions, eventually corrupting your very soul. In that blinding state, Raskolnikov cannot understand what happens to him. The two antithetical parts of Raskolnikov's personality, held together earlier by the razor-sharp dialectic of his casuistry, had persuaded him that it was possible to reconcile murder and morality. As the narrator rather mockingly notes, as regards the moral question, his analysis was now complete. His casuistry had become as sharp as a razor, and he could not find any conscious objections in himself. But these schisms deepen the longer Raskolnikov has to live with his violation of nature. The underlying ideology proliferates within his mind until it has a firm grip on him. As Carl Jung said, people don't have ideas, ideas have people. This is exactly what happens with Raskolnikov. Radical ideas continually act to reinforce the innate egoism of Raskolnikov's character and turn him into a hater rather than a lover of his fellow humans. It is not only that his ideas run counter to the instinctive promptings of his moral, emotive sensibility. These ideas momentarily transform him into someone for whom moral conscience ceases to operate as part of his personality. Not that his moral aim is insincere, but in steeling himself to accomplish his purpose, we become aware Raskolnikov must suppress in himself the very moral, emotive feelings from which this aim had originally sprung. Raskolnikov suddenly realizes that his entire relation to the normal, moral, social world has irredeemably changed. His crime, intended to benefit humanity, had cut him off from others by an invisible wall. A gloomy sensation of agonizing, everlasting solitude and estrangement took conscious form in his soul. He felt clearly that he could never appeal to these people, even if they had been his own brothers and sisters. This ideological possession poisoned his character and corrupted his soul. By committing the crime, he had not only damaged another human being, the violation of this principle of life ripped his very soul apart. His close friend Sonia realizes this damage and asks him at one point horrified, "What have you done to yourself? There is no one unhappier than you in the whole world." But what is it exactly that he has done to himself? To find out, we need to turn to the most enigmatic and curious book of our time. So let's take a look at the universe of Harry Potter, shall we? If my allusions have not become clear so far, I will state my thesis now more plainly. The transformation of Raskolnikov is clearly reminiscent of the effects of the dark arts in the Harry Potter books. Why does this matter? Well, one way of thinking about literature is that it is a metaphorical stage for human life. What happens in books seems to be remote from life only when we take the plot literally. It seldomly happens that on your 11th birthday a school for witchcraft and wizardry announces your acceptance. But read as a metaphor for the beginning of adolescence, this is quite accurate. Around that age you embark on your path to adulthood and go through various adventures of maturation. It is in this way that literature can capture many facets of human life. And this certainly applies to the description of corruption in both Crime and Punishment and Harry Potter. In the world of witches and wizards, the dark arts refer to any type of magic that is mainly used to cause harm to, exert control over, or even kill people and creatures. So it basically is about all intentions that interfere with the nature of life. The obvious property of dark magic is that you can do a great deal of damage when using it. But the more interesting issue with the dark arts is that this effect goes both ways. While inflicting harm on your surroundings, you simultaneously damage yourself. The dark arts were generally regarded as corrupting to those who use them, which is part of the reasons why they are called dark. After engaging in them extensively for many years, even Tom Riddle's appearance demonstrated his corruption. He lost his former handsomeness, eventually taking on serpentine physical qualities such as red eyes. On Harry Potter fandom it says further, Albus Dumbledore, in particular, suggested that engaging in any of the dark arts that involve murder was damaging to the soul. For instance, he told Severus Snape that Draco Malfoy's soul was not yet so damaged that he was probably capable of murder, but that if he did go through with murder, his soul would be ripped apart. This suggested that using very dark magic, such as the Killing Curse, damaged an individual's soul. The dark art of creating a Horcrux involved literally splitting the soul for the unnatural purpose of achieving immortality. So are the dark arts a metaphor too? Well, you can certainly make a case for this. In the metaphorical sense, the dark arts exist in the real world. If we look at malevolent creations such as ideology, lies, arrogance, manipulation, tyranny and nihilism, we cannot deny their harmful effects. And similarly, looking at those who take a delight in exercising them, we would surely notice an advanced state of corruption. There certainly is no shortage of vicious inventions of the human mind that try to interfere with, to use a Heideggerian term, the project of being. This also means that, like in the world of Harry Potter, there is a real-world necessity for proper education in the defense against the dark arts. This is what I think the humanities can provide. If we study philosophy, psychology, literature and art, with this objective in mind, we can arm ourselves with the most powerful weapons to fight against the dark side. This is of utmost importance, because, as Severus Snape explains, the dark arts are many, varied, ever-changing and eternal. Fighting them is like fighting a many-headed monster, which each time a neck is severed, sprouts a head even fiercer and cleverer than before. You are fighting that which is unfixed, mutating, indestructible. In this context, I want to close with a note of caution. It is not only the tempted people like Raskolnikov who are in danger of corrupting their soul. The dark arts can even have a corrupting effect on those who fight them. As we know from the famous Nietzsche quote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you."